Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. I want to talk to you about a couple of important subjects today. One of them is regarding the prisoners that Hamas want to be released from Israeli prisons. These prisoners are the heaviest prisoners and the most dangerous Palestinian prisoners in Israel in history. One of them has the longest sentence ever, and some of them are very key leading figures in other political parties from Palestinian groups. But before I get to that, I want to give you a couple of updates from the ground because we had some important developments today. The main one is the north. North Gaza is seeing very intense action again. So yesterday they reported a massive withdrawal from the north and the western part. But it seems like today they decided to carry out an attack, potentially because they saw the Palestinian resistance organizing at a very fast pace. Today, Al-Qassam brigades, they said that they killed 15 Israeli soldiers from zero distance in the northern parts of Gaza. So although Israel decided to carry out an offensive against them in the north, they got really bad injuries, very many casualties, and 15 were confirmed to be dead by Al-Qassam brigades. We had the PIJ also attacking a couple of bases, and we've heard reports that even the Hamas dogs are attacking Israeli dogs in Gaza. Israel has special units for dogs that look for explosives, and they try and find tunnels, equipments, and all sorts, but apparently the Palestinian dogs are scaring them. Israeli media reported that some Israeli soldiers found massive dogs in Gaza with big chains, biting their dogs, killing them in many cases, and they're failing with the dogs, it appears. A good news story we heard today is about an 80-year-old woman. She's called Al-Hajja Naifa, who was rescued from under the rubble after 62 days. Imagine that. Unfortunately, her daughter did not survive, but this woman who's 80 years old, she survived after 62 days under the rubble, which is a good story in the middle of all of this mess and horror stories that we hear on a daily basis. We've also had an intense action in Lebanon. Hezbollah, they declared that they attacked Israel with 20 missiles on Kiryat Shmone, and Israel intercepted a missile, a ballistic missile from Yemen. So everything is still active despite the ongoing talks about a deal. With regards to the deal, we're having more problems internally in Israel. Netanyahu doesn't want to split his coalition. He's trying to calm things down. Obviously, the reports are leaking everywhere with regards to the deal, about the level of Palestinian prisoners that Hamas want to release, about the condition, about ending the war, about the withdrawal. And obviously the closest allies of Benjamin Netanyahu are not liking it. And people who are in the current war cabinet are threatening to resign if Israel would declare or continue to declare military rule over Gaza. So there's a lot of problems politically, militarily, and on a societal level in Israel. With regards to the negotiations, we've had a statement today from Ismail Haniyeh, who is the political bureau leader of Hamas. He had a joint meeting with Ziad al-Nakhala, who is the Secretary General of the PIJ, the second largest militant group in Gaza. And these two groups obviously have a very strategic relationship, and they're very tied together when it comes to this. Obviously, Hamas is representing the whole Palestinian resistance, but them and the PIJ, they are the biggest two, and they declared that there are lines that cannot be crossed when it comes to the deal. They both said that to go ahead with any negotiations, we need to make sure that Israel leaves Gaza completely and we get all of the necessities of Gaza, not just basic aid, everything to do with what Gaza needs, and we need reassurance that Gaza will be rebuilt. And so far, they've been very consistent With this, since the temporary ceasefire ended, both Hamas and the PIJ, they said that there won't be any negotiations unless Israel stops the war. So this deal, although it's getting us closer to a ceasefire, clearly there are certain points that will not be accepted by the Palestinian resistance, especially when it's to do with the day after, and even beforehand when it comes to releasing the prisoners and the fact that Israel must stop the war before they enter the first phase of prisoner swap between them and Israel. Which leads us to the key thing that I want to talk about today, which is the prisoners. Many reports, obviously we had Hamas confirm since the beginning of this war, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. They said that they want to clear the Israeli prisons from all Palestinian prisoners because they abducted over 250 Israelis. And some of these are commanders in the army from the Gaza division. They took them wearing pajamas. They were asleep during the 7th of October. And they finished the whole job when it comes to taking down the Gaza division in just under 4 hours. People need to remember that. Because the whole story that's being sold in the West is still to this day the atrocities and the massacres of 7th of October, which Israel carried out. They killed the revelers in the festival. They massacred their own people in Be'eri. We had people confirming it who survived the day, the 7th of October, that civilians were killed due to crossfire and shelling from Israel. And Israel itself released images of their helicopters killing the revelers in massive numbers when it comes to the festival. But with regards to the 7th of October, we need to remember that this was the biggest military humiliation Israel has ever suffered in its history. So who does Hamas want to release from the prisons? Firstly, we had a report that Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza, saying that he wants the people who conducted the 7th of October attacks to be released. Some reports said in the first knock, in the next round. Some said afterwards, but he's insisting on releasing these people very quickly before those with the heavy sentences. This will give Hamas a massive image victory in Gaza, getting back the people who carried out the operation that started this and that led to it escalating to a global awareness campaign as to what's going on. And there are other reports. One news network, LBCI, they confirmed that Osama Hamdan mentioned specifically Marwan Barghouthi and Ahmad Saadat. Now, there are 3 key prisoners that are the most dangerous and the most top-level prisoners in Israel at the moment. And Hamas is looking to release all of them. They have tried to release them in the 2011 deal with Gilad Shalit, and the negotiations back then took 5 years, but they eventually ended up not releasing them because Israel had them as a red line. They just simply wouldn't release them and wouldn't carry out a prisoner exchange with Hamas. Israel does this deliberately because they want to show Hamas as a group that only cares for its own people of Hamas, whereas Hamas, they constantly repeat that they work on a national scale. They are a national movement. They care for all Palestinians, regardless of their political or ideological affiliation. As a matter of fact, since the late 90s, Khalid Mish'al, the Hamas leader back then, he said in a very famous interview he had with Al Jazeera that from his perspective, all of Hamas can go away and they're willing to die and sacrifice themselves so that the Palestinian nation can live and so that the Ummah can live, the nation, the Arab and Muslim nation, against the ongoing oppression and occupation. And they have proved all throughout their history that they stick to their word. I mean, most of these people, firstly, the leaders, they come from families of people who went through massacres, who were expelled from their homes, who witnessed massive massacres when they were young, at a very young age. And to this day, they sacrifice their children, their loved ones, their families, and everything for the Palestinian people, to get their historical rights to this day. And the main people Hamas is asking for are primarily Ahmad Saadat, who is the Secretary General of the PFLP, Marwan Barghouthi, who is a leader in Fatah in an organization that belongs to Fatah called At-Tanzim, and Abdullah al-Barghouthi, who is the most dangerous one. When it comes to Marwan al-Barghouthi, he is from Fatah movement, member of the Tanzim. He was very involved in the second Intifada, the second uprising in the early 2000s. He's sentenced for 5 life sentences in Israel. He's serving 5 life sentences in Israel. And when it comes to Ahmad Saadat is the Secretary General of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is a socialist organization. They're also looking for one state in across all Palestine. And he was in prison, this guy, in and out about 12 times. But in the early 2000s, he was imprisoned by the Palestinian Authority under Yasser Arafat, and he served in the Jericho prison. The Jericho prison, it was under the American and British management. Imagine that. They withdrew in coordination with Israel. Israel abducted him, and they sentenced him in 2008 for 30 years in Israeli prisons. When it comes to Abdullah al-Barghouthi is the most dangerous one out of all of them. He was the Hamas member, Al-Qassam Brigade's leader in the West Bank. And he's sentenced for 67 life sentences plus 5,200 years in Israeli prisons. He's the successor of Yahya Ayyash. Yahya Ayyash, who is called Al-Muhandis, or the engineer in English. He was a leader in the Hamas military wing, also primarily in the West Bank in the early 90s. And he was in charge of developing explosives for Hamas. Israel considered him to be the most dangerous person in Israel's history when it comes to Hamas and their conflict with the Palestinians, because he caused a lot of damage back in the 90s. I mean, it reached a level at one point where the previous Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, he said that I'm worried that he will be here between us in the Israeli Knesset. He used to disguise himself very cleverly. In between West Bank and Gaza, he used to pretend that he was a settler, an Israeli settler in the West Bank. And he used to carry out many operations. He ended up being assassinated through a trapped phone in Gaza, and they killed him, obviously, after a very long time of following him and trying to get to him. So Abdullah al-Barghouthi is the successor of Yahya Ayyash, and he is the most dangerous one, at least when it comes to causing many casualties inside of Israel. Like I said, he's sentenced for 67 life sentences and 5,200 years as well. Abdullah al-Barghouthi is in very difficult conditions. He's very isolated in a very small room in one of the most highly secured Israeli prisons. I mean, he met some of his family members a couple of years ago, but that was like just a one-off. And again, Abdullah al-Barghouthi, he was also imprisoned in the early 2000s by the Palestinian Authority under the late Yasser Arafat, and only after lobbying from Marwan al-Barghouthi, who was a member of Fatah, not Hamas, Fatah released him from their prisons in the West Bank, but Israel got a hold of him in 2003. Now, Hamas tried to release all of these prisoners back in 2011. But like I said, Israel rejected. They didn't want to give Hamas too much credit. Hamas already had increasing popularity amongst the Palestinians. And back then, this would have unified the whole Palestinian people behind them. Because the fact that they're asking for people who are not only members of Hamas shows that they're a national movement. They're looking out for the Palestinian people rather than their own interests, like some of their opposition states. Now, when it comes to this war, And the likelihood of them being released, there is a very high likelihood of them being released for multiple reasons. Number one, the level of Israeli soldiers and Israeli commanders that are held by Hamas. Back then, we were only talking about one soldier who is Gilad Shalit. Now you're talking about, we had 280 approximately in the beginning, over 90 of which are soldiers, active soldiers and commanders in the Israeli army. So the number is higher than, way higher than previously. And when it comes to the war itself, this genocide in Gaza, Israel obviously thought that they could put enough military pressure on Hamas to make them release their prisoners from Gaza without exchange. They tried to do that because they know the price that they will be paying is very, very heavy. Now, Israel previously had red lines when it comes to certain prisoners, but they did end up releasing them, whether when it comes to Hezbollah or Hamas. However, there is something very symbolic about these three people specifically, because Marwan al-Barghouthi, if he gets released, he will also cause a problem with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. He has a very high popularity within the Fatah movement, and obviously they're leading the West Bank. This would annoy the Palestinian president, and it will risk their whole collaboration with Israel, because Marwan al-Barghouthi was always leaning more towards the Palestinian resistance rather than just the diplomatic route that the Palestinian Authority has been taking since the Oslo Accords in 1993. So he will cause a lot of problems. When it comes to Ahmad Saadat is the leader of the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine. This movement was traditionally very popular when it comes to Palestine, but after the rise of the more Islamic-leaning movements such as Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, and obviously with them at the forefront of the armed resistance against Israel, although they're still active obviously, their power slowly faded away. But with the release of someone so symbolic, it will reignite the kind of hard left in Palestine in the form of the PFLP. Because don't forget, the PFLP is currently active, but mainly in Gaza in terms of armed resistance. In the West Bank, they're more active politically, but when it comes to Gaza, they're very much in good relations with Hamas, and they carry out many attacks against Israel. So if Hamas managed to release these people, they will get a massive boost, and the whole Palestinian national movement will be reignited again. And the likelihood of them going out as well is higher this time, because Israel will have to reach a deal eventually. Although they're delaying it, we still have talks obviously ongoing, but they know that at the end of the day, they will have to reach a deal with the Palestinians. They can't just release their prisoners without giving anything in return. And the weight of Israeli prisoners when it comes to Gaza is very, very high, especially with the Israeli army. Now, Israel so far showed that they couldn't care less about their hostages. I mean, they killed over 70. We've just had a recent report that an American news network did with one Israeli hostage. She said that she was with her 3 children, she was kidnapped, and Israel was attacking them, knowing they were there. Imagine that. So they're complaining to the whole world about their hostages, and they're actively going after them and killing them, and they killed over 70. We've seen so many reports, and the Israeli soldiers as well. So you might have an argument there that Israel doesn't care about its hostages. Yes, they would rather they die. They would rather that, Israel. But they know that Hamas hold them, especially the military ones, the ones who are from the Israeli army and the commanders, in really, really secretive and well-kept locations. They're hidden very, very well, and Hamas are going to be using them as the heaviest cards, the strongest cards against Israel, up until they get all of their conditions, not just releasing the prisoners that they want from the Israeli prisons, but also the conditions on the ground. And although we have a likelihood, a very high likelihood of them being released, it will most likely be towards the end of this war and the final stage of this deal. Because don't forget, when it comes to Gilad Shalit, it took 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, to get a hostage deal. With these ones at their weight and how dangerous they are, it can potentially take several years up until they completely get them out, unless obviously when it comes to Israel there will be something very drastic when it comes to the government, and Benjamin Netanyahu ends up definitely having a government with the opposition rather than the extreme far right that they're having a lot of problems with and who are criticizing the war heavily. So these were the main things that I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope I added some insight and beneficial information for you, and I will see you soon in the next video. Take care.